All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The State of the Security Team, Our Executives, the Problem. My name is Tyne Dark, and I'm LogRhythm's Marketing Communications Manager. I'm going to pass it over to your speaker today, Andrew Hollister, in just a minute, but first I have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to run through. So there are a couple of things for you to keep in mind throughout the broadcast. First, everyone is muted to ensure audio quality. With that said, we're here to answer any questions that you have. So if there's anything you'd like to ask Andrew related to today's topic, please feel free to send questions through the chat feature at any time. We've built in time specifically for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but again, you're welcome to submit questions as they come to you. In addition, we'll have a few questions for you throughout the webinar. Keep an eye out for a handful of audience polls. Once we launch them, you'll see the question and possible answers show up on your screen, and we'll give everyone a minute to respond. Lastly, I'd like to direct your attention to the attachment section of this broadcast. We've included several additional free resources for you. There's some shorter items like infographics, as well as some longer form pieces of content, including other research reports. They provide additional overviews of the security profession, as well as best practices for how to bolster your team from a strategic, technical, or personnel perspective. In particular, I'd like to highlight the link we've provided for Rhythm World, our fully virtual, completely free security conference that we're hosting next week. There's going to be a lot of great content, and in particular, we thought folks on this call might be interested in the panels that we're hosting on the first day of the event. First, our CISO and VP of Labs is hosting the Modern and Evolving Security Leader, a security executive panel, and our CMO is hosting a Women in Security Power panel. So please check out those resources. We hope that they're useful for you. And so our agenda today is pretty straightforward. Andrew is going to take it over from here, and he'll share a little bit of background on himself before diving into the research report, our findings, and some actionable takeaways that can help reduce stress for security teams. So without further ado, Andrew, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Tyne. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name's Andrew Hollister, and I'm the Senior Director of LogRhythm Labs and Security Advisor to the CISO here at LogRhythm. I've been with the organization around 8 years or so now, and I oversee the LogRhythm Labs team to research and deliver world-class security, compliance, intelligence, and operational risk content to our customers. I'm really excited to be presenting the results of our survey on the state of the security team, and I hope you find the presentation interesting. As Tyne said, we're going to engage the audience a little bit throughout the course of this presentation, so watch out for those audience polls. Okay, so let's get really into the meat of the content here, and I just wanted to briefly run over what our objectives were with this research that we carried out around the state of the security team itself. And cybersecurity is an industry that's constantly dealing with bad news, whether it's novel attacks, it's big data breaches, data leaks. Some years ago, we used to talk about the evening news test. Did a data breach make it into national news? And unfortunately, we're now in a position where data breaches and other types of attacks are making the news almost every single day. Added to that, legislation on data protection and privacy are constantly up on reporting, and also the threat of fines or other types of enforcement measures. And there's actually been a number of reports over the course of the last few years really looking into this area, the growing issue of stress, burnout, and other types of mental health issues. And you know, it's perhaps not really been well understood honesty actually is. And security can feel like you're sitting on top of a powder keg that could explode at any time. And of course, that kind of feeling is going to set the stress levels quite high from the get-go, and it's perhaps the waiting for it to happen that is even more stressful than the actual event itself sometimes. Of course, there's no silver bullet for stress in the security team any more than there is for any other technical issues faced by those charged with securing our organizations. But if we can identify some of the causes and resolutions, that should help set us on a par to help relieve some of the causes of stress that these teams experience, and that will help them on a personal level, whilst also improving the actual security outcomes simultaneously, which is what we're all here for after all. A team that's highly stressed is likely not going to be as effective as it could be. And our goal here today is really to make a contribution to the conversation and help organizations understand the issues and what they can do to help alleviate those issues a little better. Okay, let's get some audience participation going on here then, so you're not just listening to me commenting here. So we're going to open up our first poll now, and the question is, what's your objective with joining today's webinar? So I'll just read through the answers here while you're voting. So I'm looking for ways to improve my security team's work or morale. I'm on a security team and wondering how my experiences compare to others. I need information to support my business case to gain further support for my security program. General curiosity, or perhaps some other reason. So we'll just leave that open for about a minute to give the audience a chance to respond. Okay, so I think we're at perhaps the vast majority here, about 42% joined out of general curiosity. So, you know, hopefully the information that we're sharing during the course of this presentation can help answer some of the questions that are in your mind around the state of the security team. And otherwise, there's a mix here between wondering how experiences compare with others and looking for information to support a business case. And we'll get a little bit more into that discussion a little bit later in the broadcast. And one of the things that was highlighted in the research was really around this space of being able to get appropriate kind of budgetary support, resource support, and the executive team. Okay, so thanks for the responses there. Let's move into what we really learned from the survey presentation that we did. And there's really four major findings that we had from our overall report. And my intention here is to take a brief look at each of those findings and provide some supporting colour to that. So this was our first finding in the report, that a lack of executive support increases the security team's stress. And we found in the survey that less than 1 in 5 CEOs and CFOs are directly involved in cybersecurity strategy. And this really is not a good thing. Without the direct engagement of those roles, the security strategy likely won't have the focus and the support that it really needs, either from an overall business perspective or from a financial and budgetary and other resource type perspective. And when we went a bit further and broke the figures down some more, it actually turned out that executive interaction and accountability worsened with the company size, which at least surprised me somewhat. You would have thought that a larger organization perhaps would have a more structured approach, and the executive team would be more engaged in something which is now a significant overall business risk. We're not just talking about a computer going down, some kind of system that isn't really relevant to people, but the whole organization is dependent on automation, perhaps point of sale systems, cloud applications that are delivering your digital product to customers, etc. This really is now become core business risk. And, perhaps the view still persists to some extent at exec level that security is IT's issue and they should sort it out. Or perhaps we're not really big enough, or we're not the type of organization that's really going to be a target. And, perhaps some companies have got that idea, and thinking about the current pandemic, I don't imagine that perhaps research labs, hospitals, testing centers, and to that extent, schools and university were really considering cyber attacks, ransomware, these kind of things to be the biggest risk on their agenda. But it goes to show that the types of criminals who carry out these attacks have very little regard for who is at the other end. For example, we've seen schools not able to reopen after the pandemic due to ransomware. So anyone today thinking that they aren't a target really needs to think again. Perhaps you aren't on the target list, but the fact is you don't actually need to be a target. You could just be collateral. And we've seen that with many of the larger attacks in widespread attacks in recent times. And ultimately, the consequences are identical. Cost, disruption, plus more stress on a team that's already stretched. CEOs and other C-suite execs really need to make sure that they fully engage with the security program, given the perception from our survey that security teams lack the proper exec support. And, perhaps a more overt approach is to be recommended. Perhaps the CEO himself needs to speak to cybersecurity, or at least publicly underline the message of the CISO, etc. And coming to the CISO really does need to have a seat at the top table, as James Carter notes elsewhere in the report. Where the CISO sits in the overall organization is quite likely indicative of how seriously the organization takes cybersecurity overall. Some of the other factors causing security team stress include lack of experience in the team, and this was really around depth of experience as well as the number of individuals on the team, and a lack of cooperation from across the organization. And in particular, we found that as the organization size increased, IT team interaction actually worsens. And as a result, almost 50% of respondents stated that better cooperation from IT teams would help to reduce stress. This finding actually is also echoed in a recent Ponemon report, which stated that 64% of respondents are combating turf or silo type issues between IT and the SOC. So it's perhaps not surprising that that report also found that 60% of SOC team members were considering changing careers or leaving their jobs due to stress. Perhaps one of the answers to the cooperation question is around a better understanding of the consequences of doing or not doing what the security team is asking for. For example, regular patching is an overhead for the IT team or for the network team, but it may well save the network or infrastructure team time in the long run. For example, in devices being regularly restarted and perhaps other problems therefore being avoided. Okay, so we'll have another quick audience poll. So the question this time, do you feel heard? Do you think that your executive team has a realistic understanding of your security challenges? And we've just got two possibilities here. Yes, they have a realistic understanding of our security challenges, or no, they do not have a realistic understanding of our security challenges. Okay. Okay, so I think we've got a few more seconds here and then the voting's going to end. Great, okay, so we've got practically a 70-30 split. The very significant majority here saying that the executive team doesn't really have a realistic understanding of our security challenges, and this perhaps really underlines the premise of the whole report. The state of the security team, our executives the problem, and with a lack of understanding of what the challenges the team faces. Of course, that has kind of on or downstream consequences around resources and budget. And a little bit later, we'll also go a bit into how we can help with this, getting more visibility and getting more understanding of what the security team is actually involved with to the executives. Okay, so let's move on to the second major finding in our report, and that was this, that the security professionals lack critical tools. And in terms overall of what causes the most work-related stress, we found that lack of time was by far the leading factor. And there are many elements to this finding, and organisations will need to explore this in their own context. But there could be several factors leading to a lack of time, including insufficient resources, poorly managed teams, and so on. But taking the overall picture from the report, security professionals lack critical tools to do their jobs. And as a result of this, they may have to find workarounds, perhaps use less than effective tooling for the tasks they're trying to achieve, or do the job manually. And all of these are really linked back to the lack of time finding in the causes of increased stress. In our survey, 90% of respondents have identified that they need additional preventative security solutions. And this was addressing a wide range of things, from identity and access management through to data loss prevention, DDoS prevention, and others. And the thing that struck me at least was teams aren't missing niche solutions or tools here. We're really talking about quite mainstream or standard types of tooling. And given the finding here, budgets do really need to be carefully examined. We know that security, okay, it's a little bit of a cliche, but nonetheless, it is a people, process, technology problem, and that tools by themselves are not the silver bullet. But where 1 in 5 professionals have considered their job due to inadequate tools, and where nearly 60% cite increased funding for tools as a requirement for their security program, appropriate tooling is clearly a key success factor. does really point back to the execs again. Having the strategic vision, the executive buy-in, and the appropriately funded programs is really going to go a long way to helping the team be successful and reducing their stress. One of the surprising things to me was that so few teams had a consolidated view of their security solutions. As you can see from the slide here, nearly 70% answered no to the question in the survey. Considering the challenges there are with things like swivel chair analysis and having to keep track of multiple dashboard views of the state of security, one would have thought a consolidated view might have been more common. It could also be interesting to posit that if a lack of real-time consolidated view is also a pointer to the lack of executive visibility of what the security program is actually delivering. And to our earlier question, do you think your exec team has a realistic understanding of your security challenges? Without that overall view, without a consolidated view of the state of security, that can be a very big challenge to communicate to the executive team. And being able to provide this kind of overview enables the CISO to make the case for additional investment, headcount, tooling, etc., based on empirical evidence, rather than perhaps a bit by scare tactics or essentially just good guesswork. For example, being able to measure and track reductions in mean time to detect and respond can help to show quantifiable risk reductions, and you can then use that as a predictor of future return on investment, in addition to being able to provide a basis for ongoing improvement by the SOC management team itself. Okay, so our third major finding here was that the lack of strategic oversight results in redundant tooling. And this must really be a cause of irritation and stress for the SOC staff, having multiple tools that have a significant overlap, whilst knowing that elsewhere there are gaps in the tooling. Obviously, when we look across the security tooling landscape, there will always be some overlap in capabilities. But this question is really more around having multiple products that are actually solving exactly the same problem. And one of the key issues with this is the sheer overhead of learning, maintaining, and managing those tools. And in common with other technology, of course, security tooling still needs to be patched, upgraded, and generally managed. And it's not really ideal if you get to the stage where your SOC team is spending more time managing tools than they are actually focusing on securing your critical assets, which is, after all, what they're really there for. The survey results show that there is some intentional overlap where organizations, for example, have chosen to implement overlapping solutions to cover known weaknesses or for redundancy and so on and so forth. But in more than 50% of cases, it was accidental. And reasons for this may include different teams making purchasing decisions or perhaps older solutions being duplicated. Back to our overall question, are executives the problem and the solution? The fact that there is so much unintentional overlap in tooling does suggest that the overall security strategy is at best not really joined up, and at worst that perhaps there isn't really a coherent strategy at all. Again, the old cliche says that security is a journey and not a destination, but there's no less need to plan that ongoing security journey. And without that strategic planning, the outcomes are going to be a bit spotty at best. And to that point, leveraging a maturity model for your security operations can be a great help to ensure that the appropriate investments are being made to move the needle on the threats that the organization faces. There are a number of models available, including LogRhythm's own security operations maturity model. And the point is to ensure that the technology platform, the processes surrounding it, and the people running the operations are all considered and invested in appropriately, taking account of the threat profile as well as the budget and the resources available. Silver bullets we do not have, but a carefully constructed strategy will help avoid redundant tools, and more importantly, ensure that the tooling deployed is solving the right problem. And in turn, that will reduce the stress and improve efficiency. Okay, so our final major finding here was that consolidating security solutions would make life easier. And given what we've just discussed, this is perhaps not a particularly surprising finding. Other reports indicate that organizations may have security tools numbering in the dozens. And whilst we didn't explore this angle specifically, as I previously alluded to, learning multiple software products takes time, it takes energy, and it has an ongoing cost, not least in terms of continually having to context switch between tools. Whilst you might expect maintenance to be a factor, it was surprising to see it cited as the most common factor by a significant percentage lead in our graph here. This is indicative of both the stress and distraction caused by having too many disparate tools addressing the same or closely related security issues. Having addressed the issue of maintenance, our survey highlights both faster detection and quicker time to qualify as the key benefits they would expect to gain from consolidation of security tools. And to me, this really speaks to how bought in the security teams are to protecting their organizations, and that tooling to help quickly detect and respond is really a significant benefit in reducing stress in the security operations team. Obviously, fewer security solutions can result in fewer licensing costs, and in our survey, we saw that larger organizations see the most significant cost reductions from consolidation. I'd also highlight that almost 40% believe that consolidated solutions would help communication with executives. And this really harks back to the real-time dashboard overview. Being able to communicate state, being able to communicate progress and an overall visibility of our security status is an important element of the executive buy-in to the security program. The final point I'd make on this one is that teams believe that better integrated systems and comprehensive dashboards would do more to relieve stress than a reduction in the frequency of attacks. Okay, so I've just kind of run through the main findings of the report, and you can read it in full. It's downloadable from the attachments on the webinar here. I just wanted to highlight perhaps a few actionable takeaways for reducing stress that can really help security leaders and teams. And you know, perhaps beyond the findings in the report, what actions can you directly take to help reduce the stress in your team? So these are my 5 takeaways really for your consideration. Number 1 is it really is absolutely critical to gain executive support from the CEO, from the CFO, and ideally from the board. The CISO having a seat on that team is really critical to success. Make security part of business as usual across the organization. Security really isn't somebody else's job. It's everyone's responsibility within the organization, from the end user through to IT, security operations, and the exec team. The third item here, ensure the team has enough depth of security experience. And it was interesting to see headcount and qualifications weren't the kind of the be-all and end-all for our survey respondents. They were really looking for experience, and gaining the right blend of experience in the team really is critical. Of course, we'd all like to have a team that was filled with people with, 5, 10, 15 years experience. We perhaps can't achieve that in our organization, but being able to get that depth of security experience and having more experienced resources that more junior analysts can call on, for example, was really an important factor for our survey respondents. Number 4 was focusing on consolidation to reduce the administration burden. And as we've mentioned here, consolidation really does have very many benefits, and most of all, the reduction in maintenance overhead. And finally, providing the proper tools to enable the teams to be effective, and having those tools to do what you're asking of that team, and critically, that those tools enable them to measure the success of their efforts and enable them to report them up there to the SOC management and ultimately to the CISO and to the executive staff. Okay, so that was a quick run through of the state of the security team. I hope you get a chance to read through the report yourselves and draw some help for your teams and organisation from it. I'm just going to finish up here with a final audience poll. How can we support you? What can security providers really offer to help alleviate your stress? And we've got a number of options here: materials and explanations to help solve business challenges, materials and explanations to help solve technical challenges, more or in other ways. So we'll just give a moment or two for the audience to vote. Okay, so the voting is closed. So this is an interesting finding. So the freemium versions of solutions to test in the environment gained just a little over a third of the vote. And obviously being able to test out solutions and see if they can help solve the particular issues that we're looking to solve is an important thing. More out-of-the-box technical content that I can instantly upload to my environment was about a quarter, along with materials and explanations to help solve business challenges. And I hope the content we've given here today certainly helps talk to solving business challenges. And really that the security team can be as effective as it possibly can with the tooling that it has. So thanks very much for responding to our poll there. I'm going to move on now. Tyne mentioned at the beginning that we'd leave a few moments for Q&A at the end. So I'm just going to switch over and see if there's any questions that we can answer for the audience here. Okay, a couple of questions about audio. Our company has no problem buying tools, but won't hire more people. Is there some guidance in terms of how many staff are really needed? Oh, that's a really interesting question. So certainly, as I mentioned a little earlier, the security is a people, process and technology problem. Tools obviously is one part of that, kind of the three legs to that stool. I think in terms of guidance, we've actually released a couple of reports around building a SOC with limited resources, which really provides some guidance around the number of resources you might need in different size organizations, and also how to manage some of this challenge around being able to invest in tools but not being able to invest directly in people. So I'd really direct you to that report, which I think you can find in the attachments and links on this webinar. And always feel free to reach out to discuss that in more detail after the webinar. Okay, I think that's all the questions we've got for now. Time, if I can hand it back over to you to wrap up our webinar today.
Yep, sure thing. Thanks, Andrew. And I know we've got a question in the chat asking to get with someone directly, so just for the person who submitted that, know that we will follow up with you after this via email. So thanks again, Andrew, and thanks again to everyone for joining today's webinar. We hope it was valuable, and if you think of any questions later in your day that you'd like to discuss with us, feel free to either email us at info@logrhythm.com, or you can also connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Our social media links are all on this screen, but if you go to any of those websites and search for LogRhythm, you'll be able to find us pretty easily. As a final reminder, make sure to check out the attachment section of this page for some extra resources, and they'll remain available even once we bring this live webcast to a close. So thanks again, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.